1 month in, and my podcast went viral. But that's not the whole story. So in January of 2025, I launched my podcast, Malmborg Report. And I had a moment on Reddit where I shared a meme and it got about 80K impressions. I didn't even have a link in the post, yet it led to a significant surge in YouTube subscribers and audio listeners following me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and plays went up, comments, engagement went up. For a little bit of context, my podcast is from the point of view of someone who works at an Amazon warehouse, which I do, and I happen to be involved in labor organizing. On top of that, I have a background as a musician and an artist, and I'm very interested in how creativity ties into the lives of people who are in the creative fields, and I'm also interested in how labor ties into those creative fields. Amazon has an app where employees can post their thoughts and comments. So I made a post on the internal board in Amazon, and I said the following: Amazon and its management use scare tactics and write-ups to control us. Instead of trusting their narrative, I've made my own. My new podcast, Malmborg Report, dives into the realities of our work here, unfiltered. You can easily find it on YouTube and podcast sites. I'm exercising what is left of our free speech rights, and I'm directly challenging power. Have a nice day. Now, of course, I was trying to get a rise out of management, and I wanted my coworkers to be aware of this podcast so they could tune in. But pretty unsurprisingly, Amazon took down the post within, a couple of hours. But fortunately, I had screenshotted it, right? So I just went ahead and posted that to the subreddit for Amazon employees called r/AmazonFC. I decided to post my post as if I was just someone who had screenshotted this. I even labeled it as if I was commentating on it as an outside observer and just said unhinged. I figured I'd get a few dozen upvotes, a couple comments laughing at it, or maybe being curious about what this podcast is. But it got thousands of upvotes across 2 different subreddits. It led to a really sudden influx of YouTube subscribers. I mean, this was a really new show. I had just started, so it's not like I had a large pre-built audience. I jumped from 20 subscribers to 80 over the course of 2 days or less. At this point, I have loads of comments to respond to across different platforms. The next day I follow up with, a TikTok that I post on Instagram, YouTube Shorts, and it did well on those platforms. I sort of observed this viral moment, fostered it for about 2 days, but it was time to move on. I have a show to make, right? And that's what I've been doing. I've been putting out episodes on the podcast platforms and on YouTube and going about what I was going to do anyways, which is not just talk about Amazon or even just talk about the labor movement in traditional terms, but also talking to musicians. When you go viral for something, there is a temptation where it's like, oh, do I need to double down, triple down on that one thing? My vision is a little more nuanced, right? I see myself as someone in the labor movement because of the system we live in. I have a pretty legitimate musical and creative repertoire, but at the end of the day, I work at Amazon. And more importantly, I see how they treat their workers, not just me. At first, I viewed it as a very transient thing. Like I'm just going in there, make a paycheck for a while until I find a new opportunity, a new gig. But I couldn't just let it go. The way they were treating people, I don't have to get into depths about it. It's extremely well documented. And more broadly, right now, we're in very perilous times in terms of the United States and our political system and our democracy. If people functionally don't have power, what can they do? Where do they spend a lot of their waking hours? At their job. So what could they do with their job to get more power? They could unionize. Nonetheless, in making this podcast, I want to talk to many sectors of the community. And a big part of my network happens to be musicians and creatives, people with whom I've networked and worked with over the years. So when it comes to making the show, I can't just focus on one narrow niche because I'm trying to build bridges. I'm trying to have conversations over longer periods of time. And it doesn't lend itself to virality. We're in a very serious time, and I think we have to work through the way we talk to people. And that's something I'm hoping to do with this podcast. I mean, whenever you start a podcast, you're sort of banking on the idea that maybe people would like to listen to what you have to say. And I'm encouraged that a lot of people are coming on my podcast and they want to have a conversation with me. So, going back to this viral versus long-term goal thing, I think the reason the post I made went viral in the first place is because it spoke to the idea of challenging a corporate narrative. I said, I'm not going to follow your thing. I'm making a podcast. And we're living in a time where independent media has driven the conversation, for better and for worse, right? There are many unscrupulous and factually questionable programs out there that might share things like conspiracy theories and the like. But fundamentally, where else can we solve our problems other than by talking them out in the place where people spend time, which is the internet, on podcasts, on YouTube? So that's my vision. And it's not something that I expect to take off overnight. I'm not an established media figure. I'm just getting started here. Of course, I am making a media platform. So it is my intent to reach an audience and to drive conversation. I am being strategic in how I make content. So I launched my podcast a month ago, but I spent a whole nother month prior doing extensive planning in terms of like a workflow and how can I even keep up making content as I work at Amazon and have other obligations in my life. So I developed systems for that. Even though I had been prepared, there was still much more to learn as I was actually doing it. So yeah, I've been coming up with plans for social media content, writing blog posts, posting things at certain times, trying to do the best I can. And yeah, I think it's a fact of life that sometimes you're not going to be perfect in terms of your approach, but I've just been trying to be as consistent as possible. So now that I have a month more of experience, one thing I'll be doing is making significant notes of what's worked and what hasn't worked. And I'm taking a week of not posting an episode so I can make further progress in terms of doing more interviews and refining my system. Although I make the point that going viral is not something I just want to chase around the clock, I do want to make my content accessible for people who like short form, for people who like deep dive podcasts. But that also brings me to the other point, which is that I understand that YouTube is a huge platform. And, I make a podcast, but YouTube itself is an ecosystem. And I might make content that isn't a podcast. Things like vlogs, video essays, other things. Maybe I have interviews that don't go on the podcast, but I put them on YouTube anyways. What I'm trying to sort of refine as I go along is the idea that it's not all just about making one thing like a podcast. It's about having a multi-platform presence and knowing what works on one platform may not work on another. I'd also be remiss to not mention how supportive people have been towards this program, from the guests who have signed up to come on, to the audience from Reddit that has come over to YouTube and to Spotify and to Apple Podcasts, to my pre-existing network of people with whom I've been interacting with for years. And, none of this would be possible without them. Also, I've received a donation via Buy Me a Coffee from one of my comrades, actually. This is the kind of thing that long-term is a community project. It requires support. It requires me being aware of my audience and knowing what they're looking for. It doesn't mean you're captive to the audience. It means that you're having a real conversation with your audience and that you respect your audience. So thank you so much for joining me as an early supporter of this program and for having the patience as I develop it and refine it as I go along. If you want to support, there are many ways to support me. If you go to my website, johnmalmborg.com, I have a mailing list. I send out a weekly update. I have a support link, which you can go to and then donate to buy me a coffee. Any way you can stay engaged and keep up with the program and check it out and share it with a friend. These are all very valid ways of supporting an independent media program like this. So thank you again, and I'll catch you next time.